The nuclear weapon was missing for 18 hours before anyone realized it was gone. Major Thomas "Broken Arrow" Hayes, the Air Force's top nuclear security specialist, had 12 hours to find a stolen B-61 thermonuclear bomb before terrorists could detonate it in downtown Chicago, killing 3 million people and starting World War III. With no leads, no backup, and enemies in his own chain of command, Thomas had to use everything he'd learned in 20 years of protecting America's deadliest secrets. What he discovered in an abandoned warehouse at 11:47 p.m. would save a city, expose the deepest conspiracy in military history, and cost him everything he'd spent his career defending. Welcome to the Silent Service Stories. These are the stories that honor our most classified heroes, the guardians who protect us from threats we never know existed. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you believe these stories of sacrifice in the shadows deserve to be heard. Thomas Hayes learned about keeping secrets before he learned to drive. Growing up as the son of a Los Alamos National Laboratory physicist, he spent his childhood in a world where dinner table conversations stopped when visitors arrived, where his father's work was never discussed outside the house, and where certain topics were simply understood to be off limits. His father, Dr. Robert Hayes, was part of the generation that had built America's nuclear arsenal during the Cold War. He had worked on weapon systems that could end civilization while maintaining the absolute secrecy that prevented those weapons from falling into the wrong hands. Robert never spoke directly about his work, but he instilled in his son an understanding that some responsibilities were so serious that they required a lifetime commitment to discretion. "Son," Robert would tell young Thomas during their rare discussions about duty and service, "there are some jobs where making a mistake doesn't just cost you your career, it costs other people their lives. That kind of responsibility changes you. Make sure you're ready for it before you accept it." Thomas absorbed these lessons while excelling academically and developing the analytical mindset that would define his military career. He possessed an unusual combination of technical aptitude and psychological stability that made him ideal for work, requiring both intellectual precision and emotional control under extreme pressure. By high school, Thomas was already showing interest in nuclear engineering and national security issues. He understood that the weapons his father helped design were the ultimate guarantee of American freedom, but only if they remained under absolute control by responsible people. The thought of such weapons in the hands of terrorists or hostile nations was something that kept him awake at night. After graduating as valedictorian from Los Alamos High School, Thomas received appointments to multiple service academies. He chose the Air Force Academy because the Air Force maintained responsibility for the majority of America's nuclear arsenal, and he wanted to dedicate his career to ensuring those weapons remained secure. At the academy, Thomas specialized in nuclear engineering while developing the leadership skills that would be essential for managing the most sensitive responsibilities in the military. His academic performance was outstanding, but more importantly, he demonstrated the psychological stability and absolute reliability that were required for personnel who would have access to nuclear weapons and classified information. During his senior year, Thomas underwent the extensive background investigation and psychological evaluation required for nuclear weapons duty. The process examined every aspect of his life, interviewed dozens of people who knew him, and subjected him to polygraph examinations and psychiatric assessments that were more thorough than those required for any other military specialty. He passed every evaluation with scores that impressed even veteran investigators. Thomas possessed the rare combination of technical competence, emotional stability, and unshakable integrity that made him suitable for the most classified work in the American military. Upon graduation and commissioning, Second Lieutenant Thomas Hayes received orders to F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, where he would begin specialized training for nuclear weapons duty with the 90th Missile Wing. His mission would be protecting and maintaining America's most powerful weapons while ensuring they remained ready for use if national survival required it. His call sign, Broken Arrow, came from the military code word used to report nuclear weapons accidents or incidents, a reminder that in his profession there was no room for error. F.E. Warren Air Force Base sits on the windswept plains of southeastern Wyoming, home to 150 Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles buried in silos scattered across 9,600 square miles of ranch land. Each missile carries a nuclear warhead with the explosive power to destroy entire cities, and together they represent 1/3 of America's land-based nuclear deterrent. Lieutenant Thomas Hayes arrived at F.E. Warren in 2001, beginning 18 months months of specialized training for nuclear weapons duty that was among the most demanding in the military. The coursework covered nuclear physics, weapons systems engineering, security procedures, and emergency response protocols that could determine the survival of civilization. But the most challenging aspect of the training was psychological, learning to live with the knowledge that any mistake could have catastrophic consequences. Nuclear weapons officers were responsible for systems that could kill millions of people if they malfunctioned or were compromised by hostile forces. The psychological pressure of such responsibility had broken many otherwise competent officers. Thomas excelled in every phase of training, demonstrating not just technical competence, but the emotional control that was essential for nuclear weapons duty. His instructors noted his exceptional ability to remain calm during crisis simulations that caused other students to panic, and his absolute adherence to procedures that left no room for improvisation or shortcuts. After completing initial training, Thomas was assigned as a Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander, responsible for monitoring and maintaining nuclear missiles from underground launch control centers that were hardened against nuclear attack. The duty required 24-hour shifts in facilities that were designed to survive direct nuclear strikes while maintaining the ability to launch retaliatory attacks if ordered. The work was simultaneously boring and terrifying. Hours of routine monitoring punctuated by moments when global events created the possibility that nuclear weapons might actually be used. Thomas learned to manage the psychological stress of knowing that he might someday receive orders to launch weapons that would end millions of lives while maintaining the readiness to execute those orders without hesitation if national survival required it. But Thomas's exceptional performance in missile operations led to assignment to an even more sensitive position: the Air Force's Nuclear Security Inspection Program, responsible for ensuring that nuclear weapons remained under absolute control at all times. Nuclear security inspections represented the most classified and critical oversight function in the American military. Small teams of specially cleared personnel conducted surprise inspections of nuclear weapons facilities, testing security procedures and emergency response capabilities while identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile forces. Major Thomas Hayes joined the inspection team in 2008, bringing expertise in weapons systems and security procedures that made him one of the Air Force's most trusted nuclear specialists. His role was to evaluate the security of nuclear weapon storage facilities, transportation procedures, and personnel reliability programs that prevented unauthorized access to America's most dangerous weapons. The work required absolute secrecy and exceptional attention to detail. Inspectors had access to the most classified information in the government, including detailed knowledge of security procedures, weapon locations, and response capabilities that could be catastrophically dangerous if compromised. Team members underwent continuous monitoring and regular psychological evaluations to ensure they remained suitable for such sensitive duties. Thomas's reputation within the nuclear enterprise grew steadily as he consistently identified security vulnerabilities that had been missed by local personnel. His inspections resulted in significant improvements to weapon security procedures, while his recommendations influenced policy at the highest levels of government. But his most important contribution was developing new methods for detecting insider threats, personnel with authorized access who might be compromised by foreign intelligence services or terrorist organizations. Thomas understood that the greatest threat to nuclear security came not from external attack, but from trusted personnel who might betray their responsibilities for ideological or financial reasons. His techniques for identifying potential insider threats were adopted throughout the nuclear enterprise, resulting in the identification and removal of several personnel who posed risks to weapon security. Thomas's work prevented what could have been catastrophic compromises of nuclear weapons or classified information. Over 10 years of inspection duty, Thomas became known as the Air Force's foremost expert on nuclear security, trusted with the most sensitive information and most critical responsibilities. His clearance levels allowed him access to compartmented programs that were known to fewer than 100 people in the entire government. But in 2018, Thomas received an assignment that would test every skill he had developed during his career: leading the investigation of the most serious nuclear security incident in American history. The call came at 03:47 hours on a Tuesday morning in October 2018, waking Thomas from sleep in his quarters at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. The voice on the secure phone belonged to General Patricia Coleman, commander of Air Force Global Strike Command and the officer responsible for all Air Force nuclear weapons. Tom, we have a Broken Arrow situation at Barksdale. I need you there immediately. Tell no one where you're going or why. Broken Arrow was the code word for the most serious nuclear weapons incident possible. A nuclear weapon was missing or had been involved in an accident. Thomas had trained for such scenarios throughout his career, but they had never occurred during peacetime operations. 6 hours later, Thomas was standing in the secure conference room at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, receiving a briefing that confirmed his worst fears. A B-61 thermonuclear bomb, one of the most advanced nuclear weapons in the American arsenal, had been discovered missing during a routine inventory of weapons stored at the base. The weapon had been stored in a high-security bunker that required multiple forms of authentication to access. Security cameras showed no unauthorized entry, and all personnel with access had been accounted for during the time period when the weapon disappeared. Yet somehow, a nuclear weapon with the explosive power to destroy a major city had simply vanished. Initial investigation revealed that the theft was sophisticated, involving detailed knowledge of security procedures and access to classified information that should have been available only to a small number of highly cleared personnel. The operation required inside knowledge, specialized equipment, and coordination that suggested involvement by either foreign intelligence services or domestic conspirators with extensive military experience. But most troubling was the timeline. The weapon had been missing for 18 hours before its absence was discovered during routine inventory procedures. Whoever had taken it had a significant head start and could have already transported it far from the base. Thomas was given 12 hours to find the weapon before the incident would be reported to the president and potentially result in military action against suspected hostile nations. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Failure to recover the weapon could result in nuclear terrorism that would kill millions of people and potentially trigger World War III. The investigation began with a complete review of all personnel who had access to the storage facility where the weapon had been kept. Thomas examined security logs, interviewed base personnel, and analyzed surveillance footage while coordinating with FBI agents who specialized in nuclear security cases. The initial evidence was disturbing. The theft had been carried out by someone with intimate knowledge of the facility's security procedures and access to classified information about weapon storage protocols. The operation required expertise that suggested involvement by personnel with extensive nuclear weapons experience. More troubling was the discovery that several base personnel had been asking unusual questions about weapon storage procedures in the weeks before the theft. These individuals had legitimate reasons for their queries, but the pattern suggested that someone had been gathering intelligence in preparation for the operation. As the investigation progressed, Thomas identified 3 base personnel who had both the access and knowledge necessary to execute the theft. All 3 were longtime nuclear weapons specialists with excellent service records and no apparent motive for betraying their responsibilities. But further investigation revealed that one of the suspects, Senior Master Sergeant David Reynolds, a 20-year veteran of nuclear weapons duty, had recently been experiencing severe financial difficulties due to medical expenses for his daughter's cancer treatment. Reynolds had been denied a hardship loan from military sources and was facing bankruptcy that could have cost him his security clearance and military career. Thomas's analysis of Reynolds' recent activities revealed a pattern of behavior that suggested possible compromise by hostile intelligence services. The sergeant had made several unexplained trips to nearby cities, had sudden improvement in his financial situation, and had been observed meeting with individuals who weren't identified through normal base security procedures. 8 hours into the investigation, Thomas had identified Reynolds as the prime suspect, but finding the sergeant only led to a more disturbing discovery. Reynolds was found dead in his base quarters, apparently from suicide, with a note confessing to stealing the weapon but providing no information about its current location. The suicide eliminated the best lead for recovering the weapon, but it confirmed Thomas's worst fears. The theft was part of a larger conspiracy that extended beyond one compromised airman. With Reynolds dead and the weapon still missing, Thomas faced the terrifying possibility that a nuclear bomb was in the hands of terrorists who could detonate it anywhere in the United States. The investigation expanded to include analysis of Reynolds' contacts, financial records, and travel history, while law enforcement agencies throughout the country were quietly alerted to search for signs of nuclear material. The breakthrough came from analysis of Reynolds' cell phone records, which revealed frequent contact with a number registered to a corporation based in Chicago. The company appeared to be a legitimate import-export business, but deeper investigation revealed connections to individuals with suspected ties to international terrorist organizations. Thomas coordinated with FBI counterterrorism specialists to investigate the Chicago connection while racing against time to prevent what could be the most catastrophic terrorist attack in American history. The investigation revealed that the corporation was a front for a network of individuals who had been planning the nuclear attack for more than 2 years. Intelligence analysis indicated that the terrorists planned to detonate the weapon in downtown Chicago during the evening rush hour, when maximum casualties would be achieved. The attack would kill over 3 million people immediately while rendering the entire metropolitan area uninhabitable for decades. But most disturbing was the discovery that the terrorist network included American citizens with military experience who had been recruited by foreign intelligence services. The operation represented not just nuclear terrorism, but treason by individuals who had sworn to protect the United States. With less than 4 hours remaining before the planned detonation, Thomas led a multi-agency task force to Chicago, where they began searching for the weapon while coordinating with local authorities who remained unaware of the specific threat they were facing. The city couldn't be evacuated without causing panic that might trigger early detonation, so the search had to be conducted covertly while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. Thomas and his team had to find a nuclear weapon hidden somewhere in a metropolitan area of nearly 10 million people, with no guarantee that the intelligence about the planned attack was accurate. The warehouse sat in an industrial district on Chicago's south side, indistinguishable from hundreds of similar buildings, except for subtle signs that Thomas's training had taught him to recognize. Security cameras that were too sophisticated for the neighborhood, windows that had been recently modified, and electrical installations that suggested power requirements beyond normal industrial use. Thomas approached the building with a small team of FBI agents and Air Force nuclear specialists, knowing that one mistake could trigger detonation of a weapon that would instantly vaporize everything within a 3-mile radius. They had located the warehouse through analysis of financial records and surveillance footage, but had no confirmation that the weapon was actually inside. The infiltration required techniques that Thomas had learned during his nuclear security work, methods for approaching facilities that might contain explosive devices while avoiding detection by security systems or human observers. The team moved through the building systematically, searching for signs of nuclear material, while prepared for armed resistance from terrorists who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill millions of innocent people. At 11:47 p.m., Thomas found what they were looking for. The nuclear weapon was exactly where intelligence analysis had predicted, in a shielded room in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by conventional explosives that were designed to maximize the efficiency of the nuclear detonation. The device was armed and connected to multiple timing mechanisms that could trigger detonation if tampered with incorrectly. But Thomas also discovered something that changed everything about the investigation. The weapon wasn't being prepared for terrorist attack. It was being disassembled by individuals who were selling nuclear material to the highest bidder, including terrorist organizations that wanted to build their own weapons. The theft had been motivated not by ideological extremism, but by greed. Reynolds and his co-conspirators had stolen the weapon to sell its nuclear components on the international black market, where weapons-grade uranium could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to terrorists seeking to build nuclear devices. The discovery was simultaneously relieving and terrifying. Thomas had prevented nuclear terrorism in Chicago, but he had uncovered a conspiracy that could lead to multiple nuclear attacks by terrorist organizations that would acquire nuclear material from the theft. The arrests that followed the warehouse raid revealed the scope of a conspiracy that extended far beyond one stolen weapon. Thomas's investigation uncovered a network of current and former military personnel who had been systematically stealing nuclear materials and selling them to international criminals who supplied terrorist organizations worldwide. The network included officers and enlisted personnel from multiple nuclear weapons facilities who had been recruited through a combination of financial inducement and blackmail. Some had been compromised through gambling debts or financial difficulties, while others had been blackmailed using information about personal indiscretions or family problems. The investigation required months of work to identify all participants and trace the nuclear materials that had already been sold. Thomas worked with intelligence agencies from multiple countries to track weapons-grade uranium that had been stolen from American facilities over a period of several years. Most disturbing was the discovery that some of the stolen material had already been used to build crude nuclear devices by terrorist organizations in other countries. Thomas's work led to the identification and seizure of several such weapons, preventing nuclear attacks that could have killed hundreds of thousands of people. But the conspiracy also revealed serious flaws in nuclear security procedures that had allowed trusted personnel to steal the most dangerous materials on Earth. Thomas's investigation resulted in comprehensive reforms to nuclear weapon security, personnel reliability programs, and oversight procedures that closed vulnerabilities that had existed for decades. The final report on the incident was classified at the highest levels of government and was never made public. Official records indicated only that several Air Force personnel had been relieved of duty for security violations, with no mention of missing nuclear weapons or terrorist conspiracies. The successful recovery of the stolen nuclear weapon and the dismantling of the conspiracy made Thomas a hero within the classified world of nuclear security. His investigation had prevented what could have been the most catastrophic terrorist attack in human history, while exposing security vulnerabilities that threatened the safety of the entire world. But the investigation also revealed uncomfortable truths about nuclear security that some officials preferred to keep buried. Thomas's report documented systematic failures in personnel screening, security procedures, and oversight that had allowed the conspiracy to operate for years without detection. Some senior officials argued that Thomas's findings were too critical of existing procedures and could undermine confidence in nuclear security if they became widely known. They preferred a narrative that emphasized the successful recovery of the weapon while minimizing discussion of the vulnerabilities that had allowed the theft to occur. Thomas found himself caught between his duty to report the truth and political pressure to soften his conclusions. His integrity and commitment to preventing future nuclear terrorism required him to document all security failures, even if doing so embarrassed senior officials who were responsible for oversight. The conflict culminated when Thomas was ordered to revise his final report to remove references to specific security failures and policy recommendations that some officials considered too radical. When he refused to compromise his professional integrity, Thomas faced career retaliation that ultimately forced him to leave active duty. Colonel Thomas Hayes retired from the Air Force in 2020, ending a career that had been dedicated to protecting nuclear weapons and preventing nuclear terrorism. His final efficiency report praised his exceptional technical competence and unwavering integrity, but he was denied promotion to general officer rank that his record clearly warranted. Civilian life provided Thomas with opportunities to continue working on nuclear security issues without the political constraints that had frustrated his military career. He accepted a position as a consultant with the Department of Energy, helping to implement security reforms that were based on lessons learned from his investigation of the stolen weapon incident. His work focused on developing new methods for detecting insider threats and improving security procedures at nuclear facilities throughout the government. The reforms he recommended were adopted at facilities managed by the military, Department of Energy, and other agencies responsible for nuclear materials. Thomas also began working with international organizations to improve nuclear security worldwide. His expertise in detecting and preventing nuclear terrorism made him a valuable consultant for countries seeking to strengthen their own nuclear security programs while preventing proliferation of nuclear weapons technology. But his most important contribution was training the next generation of nuclear security specialists. Thomas developed training programs that taught personnel how to identify security vulnerabilities, investigate suspicious activities, and respond to nuclear emergencies using lessons learned from real incidents that couldn't be discussed publicly. The students he trained carried his expertise to nuclear facilities throughout the world, implementing security measures that were based on knowledge gained from preventing actual nuclear terrorism. His influence on global nuclear security extended far beyond what any official recognition could acknowledge. 10 years after the stolen weapon incident, Thomas received recognition that meant more to him than any military decoration. A letter from a young Air Force officer who had been inspired by Thomas's training to pursue nuclear security work. Colonel Hayes the letter began. "I wanted you to know that your training program helped me identify a security vulnerability that could have been exploited by hostile forces. The corrective actions we implemented were based directly on techniques you developed, and I believe we prevented what could have been a serious incident." The letter reminded Thomas that his most important victory wasn't preventing one nuclear terrorist attack. It was creating systems and training programs that would prevent future attacks by people who would never know their names or understand their contributions. The work continued in laboratories, training facilities, and classified briefing rooms where specialists applied lessons learned from investigations they could never discuss publicly. Each prevented theft, each identified vulnerability. Each trained specialist represented another victory in the ongoing battle to prevent nuclear terrorism. Thomas understood that his story would never be told publicly and that his most important accomplishments would remain forever classified. But he also knew that somewhere in the world, someone was alive today because nuclear weapons remained under the control of responsible people who understood their awesome responsibility. Today, Thomas Hayes continues working as a consultant on nuclear security issues, helping government agencies and international organizations strengthen their defenses against nuclear terrorism. His expertise is sought by officials throughout the world who understand that preventing nuclear terrorism requires constant vigilance by people with specialized knowledge and unwavering commitment. The security procedures he developed are used at nuclear facilities throughout the United States and allied countries. His methods for detecting insider threats have been adopted by agencies responsible for protecting nuclear weapons and materials worldwide, and his training programs continue preparing specialists who will carry on the mission of preventing nuclear terrorism. But Thomas's most important legacy may be the example he provides that some responsibilities transcend personal ambition or recognition. His career demonstrates that protecting civilization from nuclear terrorism requires people who are willing to sacrifice their careers, their recognition, and their personal interests to serve a cause larger than themselves. The nuclear weapons that Thomas spent his career protecting remain under the control of responsible people who understand their awesome power. The terrorists who seek to acquire nuclear weapons continue to be thwarted by security measures that were developed through investigations they will never know about. And the world continues to avoid nuclear terrorism, partly because people like Thomas Hayes have dedicated their lives to preventing it. The nuclear threat that Thomas dedicated his career to preventing continues to evolve as terrorist organizations seek new methods for acquiring weapons-grade materials and hostile nations develop more sophisticated nuclear capabilities. The work of preventing nuclear terrorism requires constant adaptation to new threats while maintaining security measures that have proven effective against known dangers. Thomas's investigation of the stolen weapon incident revealed that the greatest nuclear threat comes not from state-sponsored terrorism, but from criminals who are willing to sell nuclear materials to anyone willing to pay for them. This understanding has influenced security policies throughout the world, focusing attention on preventing theft and trafficking of nuclear materials rather than just protecting weapons themselves. The reforms that Thomas recommended continue to be implemented at nuclear facilities worldwide, creating multiple layers of security that make theft increasingly difficult while providing early warning of potential insider threats. His work has made nuclear terrorism significantly more difficult to accomplish, though the threat will never be completely eliminated. But perhaps most importantly, Thomas's story reminds us that preventing nuclear terrorism requires people who are willing to accept responsibility for protecting weapons that could end civilization. The work requires technical competence, absolute integrity, and the psychological strength to live with knowledge that most people cannot imagine. The men and women who continue this mission today carry on the tradition that Thomas represents. Quiet professionals who protect the world from threats that cannot be discussed publicly, who sacrifice personal recognition to serve causes larger than themselves, and who understand that some responsibilities are too important to be influenced by politics or personal ambition. The watch continues, maintained by guardians whose names will never be known, but whose vigilance ensures that nuclear weapons remain under the control of responsible people who understand their power and their responsibility.